Here we go again with another political compass video, and while last time we pinned down where every American president would rank on the political compass, today we're doing something a bit more complicated. Where would every Roman emperor rank on the political compass? This chart just isn't gonna cut it. That's more like it. The Roman emperors ruled over 1,000 years ago, and holding them to the same political lines as contemporary politicians even from a few centuries ago probably wouldn't be enough to cut it. So we've put together a new political compass just for this video, ranking emperors on a north-south axis based on whether they were more autocratic and imperial with their use of power, or if they deferred to the Senate and other Roman government officials. The east-west axis is based on how pro-patrician or pro-pleb the emperor was, additionally serving to represent whether the emperor based himself more on the old Roman traditions of the elite or new and radical ideas. Hello audience, Mr. Z here with Dovahhatty and updating on Rome, aka Pax Romana, with another video for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have videos like this every week, so be sure to subscribe and... oh hey, we're live action. Well, can't have that. We've got a video to make. Time to dive back into the digital world. Ah, Raycon. Eases the pain. Oh right, they're sponsoring us. If you're in the market for some quality earbuds, Raycon's probably going to be your best bet, and now more than ever since they just upgraded their everyday earbud model. They're stylish, inexpensive, at least as good in audio quality as other brands, maybe twice the price if not better. They hold in place better than any other earbud I've ever used. Heck, I take them on hour-long runs and they just don't fall out. And these things are pretty advanced too. I can tune into my surroundings without stopping my music thanks to Raycon's awareness mode, or tune out the world with active noise cancellation, giving me some more focus on those long nights editing. Folks, I'd like you all to try out a pair of Raycon earbuds today at a 20% discount, and we'll throw in free shipping too, because why not? Not only are you going to be getting probably one of the most bang for your buck earbuds on the market right now, but every sale helps the channel out. Follow the link below or go to buyraycon.com/MrZ to take advantage of this offer while it lasts. And remember, every purchase is backed by a 30-day satisfaction guarantee, so there's nothing to lose. Now, back to the video. We begin with Augustus, Rome's very first emperor, but for a time the imperial title wasn't really official. Augustus only held the status of first citizen and made it a point to claim that power was returning to Rome's Senate, thus the illusion of the Roman Republic persisted. Augustus's power was essentially unofficial, or more accurately was made manifest through his influence among the public, his wealth, and the Senate's willingness to empower him. Augustus was also cautious to avoid assuming anything that might be regarded as monarchical, given Rome had by that point a long tradition of opposing monarchy. Augustus was also following in the legacy of Caesar, opposing the old patrician establishment by riding a wave of populism from the public, albeit while still maintaining some support from the senatorial patricians. For these reasons, I believe Augustus would fall near the center of the southwestern quadrant, though likely straddling closer to the imperial axis.
Yeah, Augustus was a huge fucking tyrant. Way up there in the imperial. He breaks the scales. The man ruled with such an iron fist, like a tungsten fist. I can't put it towards how much that man was in love with authoritarianism, all the way through before he was emperor, when he was a triumvirate, and even before that. All his inclinations were for absolute rule centered on him. He killed all his rivals, he tortured his opponents, persecuted them all, and eventually came up with a system, an empire under him that he just made the pretenses of being democratic and even oligarchic, even that was a pretense. As far as pro-patrician stuff is, you gotta give him points in that direction because of how much he coddled them. He pretended he was the principate, and he was just one kind of powerful dude. He was the emperor, and everyone liked him. The historians loved him. I love him. I love Augustus, but he was a huge fucking tyrant. So, 15 out of 10 on the imperial scale. 4 out of 10 on pro-patrician. That's just because he was kind of pro-plebby when he needed to be, you know, kind of on the Caesar path, you know. Yeah, that's it for me.
The reign of Tiberius is mostly defined by the latter half, during in which he retired to the island of Capri and delegated many of his duties to the prefect of his Praetorian Guard, Sejanus. However, in his early reign, Tiberius had rejected titles that the Senate originally gave to his predecessor, such as Augustus or Pater Patriae. He was very vocal in the idea that he was the first senator, and that the body of senators should be able to act on its own very often. This attitude soured the Senate towards him, as they had grown accustomed to Augustus's hands-on governing. Tiberius would eventually not only insult the Senate by calling them men fit to be slaves, but also by ignoring them completely. His use of imperial power to eliminate his enemies puts him a fair amount into the imperial quadrant, but his disdain for the patricians lands him well into the pro-pleb area.
Ipstinius Maximus, that guy. He had his own little pedal island, and there's a lot of colorful is one word, degenerate is another for the stories we get from butthurt senators about his reign. And if you were to believe those stories, he breaks even Augustus on the scale of imperial. And as far as pro-pleb or pro-patrician, persecuted the elites, but that doesn't mean you're pro the common man. You'll land you on the middle for me. So, but then you have to contrast it with his earlier rule, his earlier life, and his generalship, and we don't get those stories from then. He was right middle of the table. Mediocrely competent general, and was doing good. His invasion of Germania campaign there, and other services else in other parts of the empire. So yeah, it's going to be middle of the table imperial from him, and dead center on the horizontal axis there.
Caligula really leaned into the powers of the emperor while simultaneously having an absolute disregard for the patrician class. Caligula had initially gained significant favor among the pleb class, lowering taxes, hosting public games, and raising wages for soldiers, but as his tyrannical tendencies grew greater, he began to disregard the plebs as well. Caligula would likely fall high up north and just slightly to the west, having had greater disdain for the authority of the patricians than he did the plebs.
It's hard to fit madman as based as Caligula in a chart like this, like a imperial, tyrant again, pro-patrician, Lamal, pro-pleb, lol, republican, haha. So it would be a one-dimensional, two-dimensional line there on imperial. It depends. Sometimes Caligula could be. It's a quantum superposition, Sometimes he's less of a tyrant. Sometimes he's more of a tyrant, and where he lands on the horizontal quantum superposition of pro-pleb and pro-patrician, it depends on how much he wants to fuck his sister that day. I'm gonna give him a 9 on imperial tyrant and 1 point on the pro-pleb direction, just because I bet some plebs might have found it funny what he was doing.
Good old Uncle Claudius. A nice change of pace from the last 3, intense emperors. While thought of as a simpleton, he quickly proved he wasn't any of the sort. He spent a long time trying to win the love of the Senate, allowing them to mint their own coins, and even restoring senatorial provinces. Yet at the same time, he empowered freemen in his administration, which enraged the Senate to no end. His love of games and building projects made him even more popular with the plebs, although he was quick to punish large groups for any infractions. Claudius also refused many titles that the Senate tried to force upon him, allowing a fragment of power to return to the body, for a while anyway. Claudius would fall slightly left of the exact middle and a little on the Republican side.
Yeah, so I'll give a slight modification on that. So everyone knows about Uncle Claudius, right? But people forget he purged more people than Domitian did, and people just forget that kind of shit. He purged a lot of elites back in his day. Equestrians? What's the fucking word? He kind of got subsumed on his overall cool personality, lovable personality. But yeah, I'll give him 2, maybe even 3 points there of the imperial scale. And pro-patrician, I wouldn't give any points. I would give him. He was kind of a historian, right? He had written works of history. I think it was on the Etruscans. So I'm gonna lodge him on the elitist side. 1 point. 1 point for the Gryffindor pro-patrician house.
Nero was power-hungry from the get-go, being raised in the shadow of others who attempted to use his eventual emperorship for their own gain, namely his mother, who he would eventually have killed. Nero made it a point to portray himself as a musician and an actor, positions traditionally held by commoners and which earned Nero praise from the plebs who saw him as identifying with a common man. His funding for public works and leisures at the expense of the patrician class, along with his more imperial tendencies, places him squarely in the northwest quadrant.
I would put him very solidly on the pro-patrician side, just because he was very embedded into that elitist lifestyle, because the harp and all the memes, right, all the stories. But as far as go for being more of an authoritarian in the imperial side, really, if you were living under him, either as a pleb or as a patrician, it got much worse. So I think, does he beat Claudius? He beats Claudius slightly. 3.5 on the imperial scale for Nero, and very on the far end of pro-patrician, like 9.
We'll be skipping a few minor figures in the year of the 4 emperors and moving right on to Vespasian, who ruled after a civil war, and because of this, he was more iron-fisted than open-handed. A strong military man who knew the power of the legions under his command and wasn't afraid to threaten any with those legions. The question of pro-pleb or pro-patrician is a hard one. On one hand, he allegedly funded many towns that were destroyed during the year of the 4 emperors, built temples in honor of the gods, and even finished Claudius's temple, an emperor who was a favorite of the people. However, he also honored the Senate and empowered them when he could. In my opinion, Vespasian falls just over the imperial line and halfway over on the pro-patrician side.
I don't know exactly for Vespasian. He's one of those emperors where, like a tyrant? No, not really. Did he coddle the senators? No, not really. Was he a pro-pleb populist? No. Did he decentralize power? Did he love the republic? Oh, I think, okay. Vespasian for me is dead center, right on the bullseye.
Emperor Titus seemed to have assumed the imperial role with goals of philanthropy in mind. He'd oversee the construction of notable public works like the Colosseum, provide aid to the public in the wake of natural disasters, further providing legal protections for both plebs and patrician senators from unjust treason charges, the list goes on. All these things considered, Titus probably lies well to the south and near the middle.
A man who truly believed he should be the sole power in Rome. Domitian didn't even pretend to allow the Senate a say in anything, as his predecessors had done. He moved the center of all power to his own imperial court and often laughed and insulted senators who tried to address him. We get a negative spin on the man due to the writings of said senators, but it seems during his reign he revalued the currency, beautified Rome and other cities, and mostly kept a competent government in which he was the undisputed head. Domitian undoubtedly is high on the imperial scale and in the middle of the pro-pleb side.
Absolutely not on the latter part. He's very deep on the pro-pleb part. If you count the average soldier, the legionaries, all the legions should be plebs as well, which, most of them were. He was beloved by the army. He was very popular by the lower man, but he terrorized those patricians, man. That elite class, those senators, they grew to fear that guy, if you trusted the stories. And for sure, 100% an autocrat, very authoritarian. He goes there, I'd give him, what did I think I gave a 9 to Caligula, I gave a 10 to Augustus, so Domitian would be...
Didn't you give like Augustus a 15 or something?
Well, but Are we actually recording that? You're gonna put him way over there in the stratosphere? I mean, I'm all okay with that. But if you are gonna throw him over the stratosphere, then I'm gonna give Domitian a 10. So it kind of matters. But anyway, if you're gonna put him on the 10, Augustus, I'm gonna give Domitian he's an 8. He's an 8. He is an autocrat, but he's not like he's literally me.
Nerva's emperorship was perhaps best described as an attempt to undo the overreaching of Domitian, returning confiscated property, reviving legal protections for the senators, and aiming to restore senatorial powers, being hesitant to exert his own imperial authority. Beyond this, Nerva also cut taxes and provided land for the poor. He would likely rank far to the south and comfortably within the southwestern quadrant.
What's the word? A rat of the system? Was it? A bitch of the system? That's what Nerva was. He was this old ass senator, basically dragged into power, and he just stayed there for as long as he needed to stay there, and 100% pro-patrician, 10 out of 10. Republican, I would have to give him points there. I mean, there's not going to be many figures that deserve it more than Nerva, I would have to say. So, let's give Nerva an 8 there on Republican and pro-patrician, because he did delegate powers to senators, and at the end of the day, he did give power to Trajan and everything, so he trusted in the whole thing. So, he's deep there in the Republican pro-patrician.
The best of emperors, Trajan's first act upon entering the city of Rome as emperor was to give out a large donation to the plebs. He then spent years building a relationship with the patrician class, which you can tell was successful because of how they speak about him in the sources. He respected the Senate's powers. However, Trajan was no doubt a monarch. He ruled through example instead of fear. The Senate tripped over themselves giving him titles, like Optimus Princeps, meaning the best princeps. Trajan was a friend to all, but you also didn't have a choice in that friendship. Trajan falls right in the middle and halfway up the imperial scale.
What? What the fuck?
Alright, I'm keeping that in there. Well,
The guy, the decentralized power. He delegated so much fucking authority to his guys, to his commanders and other senators. Like, isn't there literally a phrase, a quote of Trajan, where he literally he chastises senators for wanting to give him so much power and authority? He like throws it back at them. There was a quote like that. There is no way you can justify putting him in the middle of Imperial. No, correct that fucking mistake of yours. Where he belongs, where Trajan really belongs, as the god of the emperor he was, is I would say halfway in Republican, as in decentralized power, believes in some democratic values, and he is as far as pro-patrician or pro-pleb, he treated the senators very well. But the problem with Trajan is that he like shoots from three directions here. He was nowhere near a tyrant, but although he did have authoritarian powers, but that came with a job, right? So the plebs allowed him, the patricians allowed him, the Republicans, and he had a decentralization tendency. So you're gonna have to put a huge ass, long, stretched out PNG of Trajan that connects all three dots, and that's the correct answer.
Hadrian seemed to have greater interest in unifying Rome as a whole than maintaining pleasantries with patrician circles. Hadrian famously had 4 senators extra-legally executed and had no qualms using imperial powers to their widest reach if it meant securing Rome's borders and more closely integrating its people. Hadrian probably ranks a bit to the west and far to the north.
Oh, I'm gonna have to disagree again. Hadrian, we remembered him a lot for his more meme moments, his more genocidal moments, but as far as his actual rule, his actual policies as a person, calling him a tyrant, no, I don't agree with that at all. Either he was making trends back then with all the Greek shit he was into, or because if he was back then the case that he was extremely Greekified, then yeah, he was very much a pro-patrician, just in that elitist sense. And yeah, he doesn't go in the Republican direction, no, not at all. And so for me, Hadrian is gonna land he's gonna land like a 2 on the Imperial, and he's gonna land like a 6 on the pro-patrician.
We don't have as many sources on Pius as we do on the other 4 good emperors. However, we know a few things about him. He was an effective administrator and led a large building project that allegedly extended clean drinking water to millions, which is pretty cool. Additionally, he helped a significant number of freed slaves to be enfranchised. We also know he ran a relatively conservative regime, as it seems his inner circle consisted of just a few powerful senatorial families. He believed that adhering to the old ways made Rome great, and he strove to keep them in place. Oh, and did I mention he built a wall? Antoninus Pius will be placed a quarter of the way up the imperial scale and about the same distance into the pro-patrician quadrant.
Yeah, dude was just my great-grandfather. He just stayed in his little villa forever, never left it. And every time we went to check in him, he still had pretty good health for his age, and he kept living on forever. And he was still sharp. He still did stuff, and you could see that, well, things around him, the people around him, they just kind of stayed in stasis. It didn't change much. He was just that guy. And just as I loved him, I also love Antoninus. Vespasian kind of took his place on the true neutral down there. And I guess, just to not be boring, we're not going to put 2 people in the same position. So Vespasian did put he did build a Colosseum, or finish the Colosseum, right? And he did a piss tax, right? So we're gonna throw him. We're gonna do a correction for Vespasian. He gets kicked off 1 point to the left, and then Antoninus Pius takes his rightful place.
Marcus Aurelius proved to be far more legalistic and personally hands-off than his immediate predecessors, often deferring to the Senate for their approval and permission on various decisions, and tended to balance his treatment of the plebs and patricians with a general desire for Rome's overall welfare. Aurelius would probably lie fairly south and perhaps just slightly over the line onto the side of the patricians.
We're talking Marcus Aurelius of history or of the movie? Because if it's the movie, then he is just 10 out of 10. He's the only one who's going to get a 10 out of 10 on Republican. Wanted to restore the Republican shit. But no. In the end, he did rule about very competently, but as far as his means, he was very much copying Hadrian and Trajan, so pretty good and not authoritarian or tyrannical. Not to say he didn't execute people when he needed to, but yeah, nothing to comment on really. His whole life was subsumed with having to deal with the Germoids invading the frontiers, as they were fond of doing, and they kept being fond of doing for a very long time. And yeah, that doesn't make him a tyrant at all. So as far as being pro-pleb, he was very pro-legion because he had to deal with them a lot, but he also was a philosopher. He was very educated, and it was very much his vocation in life, so also pro the elites.
Lucius Verus was a man of the people. One of his first acts after his ascension was to create a fund for the poor and orphan children of Rome. Although the Senate gifted him tribunician power and the official title, Caesar Lucius Aurelius Verus Augustus, he never wielded imperial power to the extent of his predecessors, even on a personal level. It is said that he allowed freedom of speech, including jokes about him and his family, and even tolerated arguments on his decisions. Lucius will be placed similarly to Marcus Aurelius in the southern quadrant, but more aligned with the interest of the plebs.
Commodus is an interesting instance of an earlier emperor who demonstrated significant apathy toward imperial responsibilities. Having grown up in the comfort of the power and nobility afforded by his father Marcus Aurelius, Commodus lacked much of the drive for statecraft and political maneuvering, initially preferring to defer authority not to the Senate but to men within his inner circle. Though clearly he preferred the life imperial power had afforded him, just none of the responsibility, and he would adopt a more authoritarian position as the years wore on, demanding he be treated as a god. While it'd be fair to call Commodus politically apathetic, he did romanticize the life of gladiators over that of the elite nobility, so we'll place him slightly to the west and far to the north.
Alright, so where do you think I was going to place him?
Is it going to be in the same spot?
Is that our guess?
Yeah, why not?
He doesn't belong anywhere on this chart. Dude wasn't an emperor. He was a degenerate that played gladiator for, what was it, over a decade, and he got killed for it. There's no imperialism going. There's no emperorism going. There's nothing. Absolutely nothing. 102% of his responsibilities were delegated to God knows who, one shill or another. And no, it's wrong. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to make a little cuck cage, a cuck gladiatorial arena that's going to go in the corner over there, far beyond this political chart. And he's going to be there. And then you can draw me laughing at him.
Pertinax ruled for 87 days, which makes it difficult to discern his leanings. However, we do know that he worshipped at the altar of Marcus Aurelius, aspiring to model his rule after him, a stoic and restrained governance. With this knowledge, we will place him in the same spot as his hero, Marcus.
We'll be skipping Julianus and moving over to Severus, who famously executed several senators and assumed wide-reaching imperial powers with populist support and military might. Naturally, he'll rank high up in the northwest quadrant, though without being explicitly pro-pleb, only slightly west.
Imperator Caesar Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Pius Augustus, otherwise known as Caracalla, is often portrayed as a cruel tyrant with psychotic tendencies by our sources. Hated by the Senate, this puts our man firmly on the side of the plebs. He also extended citizenship to all free men currently living in the Roman Empire. He still trends high into the imperial quadrant as he ruled with an iron fist as a singular monarch.
Love the stories about Caracalla. His rage outbursts. The time that he massacred in Egypt, he massacred the Alexandrians because he didn't like a joke in a theatrical play. I love them. I take all of them seriously just because it's damn hilarious. And he portrays this image of the tyrant of tyrants. And people say Valentinian was angry, had a temper. And he did, but Caracalla, man, he was such a fucking angry little beast that literally killed his brother in front of his mother, although his brother did deserve it. So he's gonna be a 10 out of 10 for me on the imperial scale, as much of a tyrant as Augustus was, but none of the competency. He died in a real bitch way, didn't he, too? He was killed by a praetorian while he was taking a piss on the desert, something ridiculous like that. As far being pro-pleb or pro-patrician, you were none of those. You were a joke. So you exist in a in a lower dimensional state.
We'll be skipping 3 minor emperors to reach Elagabalus. Elagabalus is said to have had a total disregard for Roman politics and traditions, introducing a variety of foreign traditions into Roman life, possibly attempting to start his own religion, and supposedly going as far as to prostitute himself as a woman. He's not particularly imperial nor republican, and favored by neither the plebs nor the patricians, which kinda just leaves him dead in the center.
And they call Caesar the Queen of Bithynia, this Queen of the Queen of Syria, Queen of the Roman Empire, really. Huge tyrant, made all the fucking senators thief, so it's not pro-patrician, pro-pleb, nowhere near that. Although I did think that his dynasty was popular for a moment, but I don't remember to what extent it was because they didn't know what the emperor or empress they had, and Republican, yeah, it's another Lamau. So it's I've been breaking too much of the standard here, so I'm gonna try to fit Queen Elagabalus here somewhere. It's gonna be a 7 on the imperial with a pro-pleb, pro-patrician. They both hated him. Her. I'm pretty sure you just have to pick who hated him more, right? And I think the Centaurs hated him more.
Severus Alexander was at once an attempted throwback to a more high imperial time, and also a case study in the failures to come. It's written that he empowered the Senate, as he was only 14 when he ascended the throne. He was also aware that the army ultimately decided his family's fate, so he invested heavily in the legions. Alexander falls halfway into the pro-patrician side, but slightly into the republican quadrant, as he sought to rule with a light hand.
Maximinus Thrax was a military emperor who commanded a degree of popular support from the legions and exerted significant imperial power as a result, not being weighed down by legal procedures as his predecessors had. Like Severus, Thrax wasn't necessarily pro-pleb, but more so pro-military and anti-senate, which would place him fairly north and slightly west.
The emperor with a humorous name, who ruled for only 99 days, was firmly a Senate plant as emperor. More of a military man than his partner Balbinus, Pupienus attempted to use his German bodyguard to fortify his rule, placing him slightly north and firmly on the side of the patricians.
Emperor Decius had adopted harsh measures against what he felt were corrosive elements within Roman society, most especially among the pleb population. This included the Decian persecution, which compelled the citizenry of Rome to demonstrate loyalty to Roman tradition with a sacrifice, widely regarded as the first state-sponsored Roman persecution of Christians. Decius's extreme use of authority in the name of old traditions places him high in the northeastern quadrant.
Unfortunately, Valerian is most well known for being captured by Shapur and enduring any number of imagined tortures at the hand of the Persians in his final days. During his reign, both the western and eastern halves of the empire were in flames. As a military emperor, Valerian falls deeply into the imperial quadrant and about halfway onto the patrician side. He had little to no time to worry about anything other than keeping the empire under his tight control.
Gallienus's reign was characterized by constant military campaigning and dealing with revolts, and as such there isn't too much direct policy making to work off of. However, Gallienus had recognized a need to further consolidate power within Rome for the sake of preventing further usurpations, revolts, and secessions, and had been willing to compromise with local and pleb populations to achieve this consolidation. Based on this, Gallienus would likely rank near the high middle of the northwestern quadrant.
A often overlooked and underrated emperor, Claudius is mostly known for his perhaps victory over the Goths at Naissus. The timing in the sources is hard to discern. However, it seems he spent his relatively short reign defeating the Goths wherever he found them. Being a military emperor, he ranks high into the imperial range and slightly into the pleb quadrant, as he was reliant on the military for his legitimacy, as many 3rd century emperors were.
Emperor Aurelian came to power in a time of great need of centralization and unity, need of strength and need of aid. He provided all three, aggressively combating Rome's enemies both foreign and domestic, consolidating power within the seat of the emperor and a new religion. He abolished old welfare systems to be replaced by new and improved ones, Aurelian's emphasis on power naturally places him near if not at the top of the chart, but his balancing of old traditions with the contemporary needs of the plebs makes placing him to the east or west difficult, though given his concentration on preserving the old traditions of Rome, we can assume he would fit slightly to the east.
Divinus, that guy, Aurelian, love it. I just picture reading his Wikipedia page for the first time several years ago, way before YouTube and shit, and it just made me boom, man. Holy fuck, how did you do all of this in 5 years? You destroyed the barbarians, fought against corruption, we fought against usurpers, like, oh god, and made the city more protected. Jesus, he did everything. Try to understand the mind of a god like Aurelian, impossible. So you're gonna try to make me fit him in any of these? Even if he was a huge tyrant that sucked senatorial cock and was a huge communist that also wanted to restore the republic, he was none of these and all of these at the same time. He transcended it all. So he doesn't go in the cut cage, he doesn't go lower dimensional, he goes in a higher dimension. He goes to the 5th dimension, that guy.
One of the first things we read about Diocletian in the sources is that he perhaps avoided the city of Rome early and often in his reign just to let the Senate know exactly how he felt about them. Another factor indicating his sentiments was that he dated the beginning of his rule from when he was declared imperator by the troops, not the date the Senate officially declared him emperor. Knowing this, we will place Diocletian firmly on the side of the plebs. Additionally, I will position him well within the imperial quadrant, as his reign is often seen as the end of the Principate and the beginning of the Dominate. This era witnessed emperors being treated close to a godlike status, and an office that was once seen as merely the first among equals was now regarded as an almost mythical position.
Maximian would largely follow along with Diocletian's policies and ran closely alongside him.
Constantine the Great strived early in his reign to make the Senate not feel threatened by his ascension to emperor. He promised to restore old privileges and even allowed the supporters of some of his former enemies to live. However, he began to favor equestrians over the senatorial class as his reign went on, and senators would watch as many of their privileges, such as command of armies, would fall to men of a lower class. I think he ends up more on the side of the plebs. The imperial republican question with Constantine is interesting. It's hard for me to say any of these later emperors lean towards republicanism, especially under the Dominate. Constantine kept the title of Pontifex Maximus after declaring himself a Christian around the age of 40, and therefore made himself head of the church and the empire. I would place Constantine the Great about halfway up the imperial scale.
Julian, commonly known as Julian the Apostate, took a firm position in aggressively attempting to revive old Roman traditions against the waves of change which trickled upward from the pleb population. This included restoring the authority of the Senate and regressing the imperial title to truly a position of first among equals while eviscerating the bureaucracy that had become so prevalent in the empire. Julian's efforts to restore Roman traditionalism place him as the farthest eastward emperor on the chart and ranking just above Augustus on the imperial republican scale. Julian will be the last emperor to have his adherence to old Roman religion be considered for a pro-patrician traditional lean, as after this point Christianity will hold a much more prominent place within elite Roman circles, while old Roman religion fades to the fringes.
Valentinian is said to have hated the well-dressed, educated, wealthy, and well-born. That bit of information is more than we normally get from an era of emperors who struggled mostly just to remain in power. So we could say he falls well into the pro-pleb quadrant. I struggle to place military emperors because, on one hand, they are using the power of the military to remain in power, which is decidedly imperial, yet they had less actual imperial power than emperors of the past due to manpower shortages, local usurpers, increasing border issues, and so on. I'll place Valentinian slightly into the imperial quadrant.
One of my favorite emperors of all time, just because of how he died and kind of how he lived. He had a death. I love it. I think about it more often than would be healthy. I laughed at it. I so hope it's true. I so hope he didn't get some boring ass stroke while he was sleeping or some shit. I hope he died exactly down to the last atom on how it's described in the story. So yeah, he was very tyrannical. He punched people because of religious offenses. Very Christian, that guy. and he ruled with an iron fist, essentially. I don't hear much stories of people saying good shit about him delegating power or sharing stuff, even though he was technically a co-emperor. As far as supporting the elites, I must say he did support them because he was a very thorough Christian, and by then the elites were quite Christianized, and there's no stories of him going against them at all, really, oppressing them much. Nothing on the Republican scale. He's like for me, he's like a 7 on Imperial. He's like a 3 on pro-patrician.
Emperor Valens held power at a time in which the authority of the emperor was waning, and power was increasingly decentralized to local authorities, who would probably rank just slightly south and west of Valentinian.
Gratian was yet another emperor who spent his time running from fire to fire throughout the empire. He notably ended pagan practices such as the rites of the Vestal Virgins and confiscated money meant for sacrifices, transferring it into the imperial treasury. This made him an enemy of the still pagan Senate in Rome. His pro-Christian stance and seizure of patrician wealth places him well into the pro-pleb quadrant. Gratian ruled with the sword and died by it as well. He ranks in the middle of the imperial quadrant.
Magnus Maximus had been a usurper who had successfully seized control of Britannia and Gaul from the empire, eventually expanding to seize Hispania and Africa. It's a bit hard to place him precisely, but given he had widespread support from the Roman Britain public who favored him over Gratian, we can assume he was somewhat pro-pleb or at least knew how to channel local populist support. Aside from his military background and seizing of power, Magnus took it upon himself to aggressively persecute anyone he viewed as a heretic, placing him high in the northwestern quadrant.
Valentinian II was a puppet emperor who held no real power. Whether it was his family ruling over him early in life, or Theodosius and Abrogast later, the emperor held no actual power during his reign. Another Christian emperor who angered the pagan Senate, he was no friend of the patricians, placing him firmly to the west, and we will say right in the middle of the graph, due to his lack of imperial strength.
Theodosius was representative of the Christian elite which had been gaining ground within the upper echelons of Roman society since Constantine, and under him there was a strong effort to promote Christian orthodoxy while simultaneously pursuing an artistic revival of traditional Roman styles. He would likely fall near the middle of the northeastern quadrant.
We have entered the era of child emperors, which is not good. So in reality, Arcadius went from one handler to the next throughout his reign, an ineffective emperor who relied on the court for almost everything, northeast quadrant for the unfortunate lad.
Honorius assumed the throne at a young age and is generally regarded as ineffective. His attempts to preserve Roman unity and Christian tradition, albeit supposedly half-heartedly, puts him just slightly in the northeastern column.
A rather long reign for the period, Theo II actually presided over some game-changing moments in the Eastern Roman Empire. The beginning of religious controversies that would trouble the empire for years, and of course, his construction of the Theodosian walls, which you could say helped lead to a 1,000-year reign of the Eastern Romans. A lawman who was respected by the people, and a devoutly religious one as well, he would go on to become a saint. I would say this places him deep into the pro-pleb quadrant. Imperial power is harder to quantify, although I will place him towards the bottom of the quadrant due to the fact that he seems to have competed with female members of his family for said power for a lot of his reign.
By the time of Emperor Valentinian III, the authority of the emperor was slowly being stripped away, and he himself further conceded much of it to the Pope, though still he acted with a high degree of imperial authority as an emperor of his time would. Supposedly indulgent yet also pious, he would likely fall to the southeastern quadrant.
Majorian was a shining light in an era of darkness, even though his reign was short. He immediately understood he needed the Senate in his corner if he was going to rule efficiently. He canceled some gigantic tax bills that would have caused some senators to lose their status if paid. I think this even-handed rule places him right between being pro-pleb or pro-patrician. Majorian wielded a surprising amount of imperial power for the time, being able to raise armies and sweep into Gaul and Hispania. He was truly a man who died too soon. He will be about halfway up the imperial scale.
Yeah, that guy. Sad vibes for Majorian. It's actually kind of funny. You go back to the policies, these very short-lived policies before he got betrayed and killed. He actually was thinking very long-term about the empire. One of his policies actually was to give more weapons to the citizens to help them defend the empire by themselves before help arrived. And he wanted to... he kind of had that Augustan policy of encouraging births, getting more marriages going and more children to grow the population. As far like in modern terms, modern politics, you want to corner that policy of improving birth rates and traditional marriages. You gotta throw him more on the pro-elitist direction there. But even though that's mostly to target the plebs, really, he wants the plebs to be breeding, you know. So yeah, and after all, his reconquests, as I said, like I made this point before, his military focus did end up benefiting more the people, really, because they were the ones being invaded by the barbarians. The estates of the rich were too, but you know, a lot of the senators didn't need those estates to live. He's gonna be pro-pleb for me, like a 5. And as far as Imperial goes, definitely not Republican. He's gonna be like a 5. I mean, a 6. He's gonna be a 6. He had to use his powers to restore everything.
Finally, we have the last adult emperor of the Western Roman Empire, Julius Nepos. Nepos took power when there was no true power left in Rome's arsenal. He sought to restore Rome's might and reassert control over lost lands, but there was very little he could do. He will rank further to the east and a bit to the north given his intentions, but his actions were extremely limited. Nepos would be succeeded by Romulus, who ruled as a child and was deposed by Odoacer, thus ending the Western Roman Empire. Thank you all for watching, and a big thanks to our guests Dovahhatty and Updating on Rome, aka Pax Romana. Like the video if you enjoyed it, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Mr. Z, out.